I'm going to hurry up and introduce our keynote speaker for the evening because I have been practicing his name. And while I think I phonetically have it correct, I'm going to try to make it through this. And hopefully he will be forgiving should I make a mistake and not get it right. Arsalan, Iftikhar. I want to say it again because it just felt so good. Arsalan, Iftikhar, is an international human rights attorney, global media commentator, and the author of the book Scapegoats. I was given a copy. I haven't finished it, but it is an amazing read. And it talks about how Islamophobia helps our enemies and threatens our freedoms, which President Jimmy Carter called an important book that shows Islamophobia must be addressed urgently. He also serves as a senior editor for the Islamic Monthly, and his interviews regularly appear on global media outlets like National Public Radio, NPR, Al Jazeera English, CNN, Washington Post, NBC, Meet the Press, and many more. So I say that Arsalan Iftikhar sounds like somebody I need to make sure is my Facebook friend. We're going to bring him up, and while we're doing that, I know all of you all have your cell phones out. Make sure that you check in and let them know that you are a part of standing with the Muslim community, getting our lives and getting it right. I present to you all our keynote speaker, Mr. Arsalan Iftikhar.
Assalamu alaikum and good evening. First of all, Cherie, thank you for that introduction. I mispronounce my own name wrong all the time. So I would like to, first of all, take a moment to very sincerely and earnestly thank CAIR-Oklahoma, thank Adam Sultani, the wonderful CAIR-Oklahoma board and staff for inviting me here this evening. I speak for a living, whether it is in the media, on television, or on college and university campuses and fundraising dinners like this all over the world. But CAIR has and will always hold a very, very special place in my heart until the day that I die. And the reason is because before I started my career in journalism and in writing, after September 11th, I actually served as the first ever and only national legal director for CAIR in Washington. And when we talk about the post-9/11 world, when we talk about September 11th, when we talk about Donald Trump today, when we talk about Islamophobia and all of these things, it is absolutely imperative for us to understand that everything that we see transpiring today in the year 2017 has been transpiring for the last 16 years at the very least since September 11th, 2001. And so in order for us to understand the landscape of Islamophobia and what we are up against, both politically and sociologically here in this country, we have to have a little bit of an understanding and a reminder in terms of what happened in the days, weeks, and months after 9/11, which will really quite lucidly highlight where we are today in the United States. Because I have said in every speech, every public TV appearance that I've given, that Islamophobia was not invented by Donald Trump, and Islamophobia will not end with Donald Trump. Now, again, I want to thank my dear brother Hassan Shibli for doing such a wonderful fundraiser. And again, with your donation envelopes in front of you, again, as an attorney myself, I would be remiss if I did not remind you that all of your donations to CAIR-Oklahoma are tax deductible. And even though Donald Trump doesn't pay his taxes, I know we all do. And with literally 2 weeks left until the April 15th tax filing deadline, any donation that you make today will be an ease on your tax burden overall. So even if his spiritual persuasion didn't tug at your purse strings, hopefully the real world financial benefits will. When I started working at CAIR, I started first working at CAIR when I was 23 years old. And when I was in law school, even though I went to a top 20 law school here in the United States, I always knew that I wanted to spend the rest of my life doing public service for my people and my country. And after I graduated from law school, CAIR created this position called the National Legal Director solely for me, and they've never hired anybody since the day that I left. And to give you a landscape of what we dealt with immediately after September 11th, I was the first ever full-time lawyer hired by any national Muslim organization in the country. In any organization, let alone CAIR. ISNA, MPAC, all the other American Muslim organizations did not have a full-time attorney on staff at that time. And now today, by the grace of God, Hassan was telling me that he has 6 attorneys on staff at CAIR Florida alone. So we've come a long way in terms of empowering our community, but we have to understand that the challenges that we are facing are daunting. They are not only not subsiding, they're actually increasing and have increased for the last 15 plus years since September 11th, 2001. How many people in this room remember where you were on 9/11/2001? Please raise your hand. Most people are raising their hands. For some of you college-age students and younger, you might have been born in the post-9/11 world. But for those of us who are adults on 9/11 and actually remember that horrific day, we have to see, again, the days, weeks, and months and what happened after that in terms of how it affected millions of Muslims, Arabs, and South Asians here in the United States. So you want to talk about Islamophobia in the media? Well, you need look no further than 4 days after 9/11, on September 15th, 2001, when famous or infamous syndicated columnist Ann Coulter wrote a newspaper column that was published in over 340 newspapers in the country, which said that we should kill every Muslim leader and convert them to Christianity. She also wrote in that same column that we should airlift pig's blood into places like Iraq and Afghanistan and other Muslim countries because Muslims do not associate with anything having to do with pork. A week after that, there was a very aptly named Republican congressman from the state of Louisiana named John Cooksey. And after 9/11, when John Cooksey was asked about what he thought about racial profiling, his response was, and I quote, "If I see a man walk in with a diaper on his head and a fan belt wrapped around that diaper, that guy needs to be pulled over." A few weeks after that, another Republican congressman from the state of Georgia, Saxby Chambliss, was quoted by the Associated Press as saying that, quote, we should shoot every Muslim that crosses the state line. Now, instead of voting him out of office, the people of the great state of Georgia actually decided to promote him, and he actually became the senior senator from the great state of Georgia. Now I can spend an entire hour here going over a litany of Islamophobic remarks that we have seen in the media since 9/11. This was during the administration of George W. Bush. Well, at the time, George W. Bush's spiritual advisor was a man by the name of Franklin Graham. Now, some of you might know that Franklin Graham is the son of famous American televangelist Billy Graham. And again, he served as the spiritual advisor to President George W. Bush. Well, on a November 2001 broadcast of NBC Nightly News, he went on record and he said to Tom Brokaw and millions of Americans watching that he believes that, quote, Islam is a wicked and evil religion. Now, even Tom Brokaw was taken aback by this statement, and so he gave him an opportunity to retract his statement. But not only did he not retract his statement, he doubled down on that statement, and he's repeated that statement many times since and up until today in the year 2017. Now, many of you know that the first hate crimes murder after 9/11 was sadly perpetrated against a man who was neither a Muslim nor an Arab. He was an Indian Sikh man in Arizona by the name of Balbir Singh Sodhi. Now, Mr. Sodhi, in observance of his Sikh faith, regularly kept a turban and a beard in the religious observance of his faith. Now, of course, Mr. Sodhi, who owned a Chevron gas station at the time, was so aware of the xenophobic hysteria that was taking part here in the United States. He was so aware of this bigotry that every day when he went to work, he literally wore a red, white, and blue turban to work every single day to show his love for his adopted homeland. But even that didn't save his life. Because a 44-year-old man named Frank Roque walked into his Chevron gas station in Mesa, Arizona, and shot Mr. Sodhi point blank in the face, killing him instantly. Now, as the police and television cameras started to congregate on the gas station as Frank Roque was being taken away in handcuffs, all he repeated as a mantra was, "I am the real patriot, I am the true American." Now, on the same day as the Sodhi hate crime murder, there were two other hate crime murders that occurred here in the United States. There was a Pakistani-American convenience store owner in San Antonio, Texas, who was shot and killed in his store. And there was a Coptic Christian Egyptian-American who was shot and killed outside of his store in downtown Los Angeles. Now, we look at the policies and the laws that are being undertaken today by the Trump administration, but we have to remember that, again, Donald Trump was not the inventor of terrible laws in the United States. George W. Bush was. And in the days, weeks, and months after 9/11, he passed a piece of legislation, a 348-page law, which was called the United and Strengthening America by Providing Appropriate Tools Required to Intercept and Obstruct Terrorism Act, which is better known by its acronym USA Patriot. Now, USA Patriot at the time trumped over 50 federal laws that existed here in the United States. It allowed local law enforcement officials, police stations, and sheriffs to decide who was a quote-unquote domestic terrorist and who wasn't. It broadly expanded the scope of the term domestic terrorism. So much so that the sheriff of Hennepin County, Minnesota, which is the hometown of the Twin Cities of Minneapolis and St. Paul, unilaterally decided under the auspices of USA Patriot that he was going to label the college student groups Anti-Racist Action and Students Against War as domestic terrorists. USA Patriot allows FBI agents and police officers to come into your house without a warrant, without even having to let you know that they're in your house, take materials, including hard drives and any sort of computer peripherals, again, and not have to notify you at all because of the protections that they have under USA Patriot. Now, at the time, Muslims, Arabs, South Asians, and our allies in the Latino, African American, LGBT, Native communities mobilized so that they helped to pass over 200 resolutions at the city, state, the local city and state levels condemning USA Patriot. So again, where we are today is part of a narrative history arc that we oftentimes forget and that we oftentimes don't think about. Which leads me to the 2008 election of Barack Hussein Obama. Now, by a quick show of hands, please raise your hand if you have ever heard this sentence before. Barack Obama is a Muslim. Let it be noted that every single person in this room is raising their hands. Now, I have said this on NPR, I've said this on CNN, Al Jazeera, and I will say it until the day that I die. When people said that Barack Obama was a Muslim, that was their code for saying that Barack Obama is black. That was their way of otherizing him in a way that has become politically acceptable in America today. It's funny because whenever somebody says Barack Obama is a Muslim, I feel like Jerry Seinfeld should pop out and say, not that there's anything wrong with that. Right? Because being a Muslim has now become a slur in America. And we heard during both of his 2008 and 2012 presidential campaigns about Barack being some sort of crypto-Muslim Manchurian candidate, right? Who was going to have his political strings pulled at the sinister behest of the global Muslim mafia, which I am proudly a card-carrying member of. Now, I can assure you I'm a brown civil rights lawyer from Chicago. I've known Barack for 15 years or so, and I can assure you that Barack does not know our secret handshake. He's not a Muslim, so for those of you who are still concerned, you have nothing to worry about here. But what I want you to keep in mind is that these whisper campaigns of Barack being some sort of crypto-Muslim became so toxic and so radioactive that in June 2008, at a Obama campaign rally in Dearborn, Michigan, 2 Muslim women who wear the hijab, the headscarf, were actually pulled out of a photo opportunity with Barack by Obama's own campaign volunteers themselves. So let that sink in for a second. Liberal progressive Democrats pulled 2 Muslim women out of a photo opportunity because they understood even the optics of Barack being seen with Muslims would be detrimental to his campaign. We did not see Barack Obama set foot inside an American mosque until the 8th year of his presidency. He visited masjids and mosques overseas. He visited every house of worship here in the United States, churches, synagogues, temples. Never set foot inside an American mosque until the 8th year of his presidency, because the minute that he would do it, the right-wingers would take a picture of that and say, see, we told you he was hiding the whole time. How many people in this room remember the controversy over the Ground Zero Mosque in New York City? So the Ground Zero Mosque controversy is a very interesting case study because, first of all, it was neither at Ground Zero nor was it a mosque. For those of you who might know, the Park 51 Community Center was going to be a $100 million, 10-story community center similar to the 92nd Street Y, which the Jewish community has in Manhattan. Now, this Park 51 Community Center was going to have basketball courts. It was going to have culinary schools. As former MSNBC news anchor Keith Olbermann once said, can you imagine the thought of terrorist point guards and terrorist chefs running around New York City? And the interesting thing about how this community center generated controversy overnight, the first time the Park 51 Community Center was ever mentioned in public was on page A1 of the New York Times. It was on the front page of the New York Times, and nobody said a word. And then 6 months later, there were 2 Republican candidates for governor in New York who were duking it out in a vicious primary battle. And one of the Republican candidates decided to take out a 30-second television spot against his opponent for supporting the community center. And that is the first time that we heard the term Ground Zero Mosque. So again, for 6 months, nobody had said anything. But the minute that this 30-second ad came out, it became fodder for Islamophobes everywhere. Now, a lot of the arguments that these right-wingers used in trying to oppose the community center was that we should not allow Muslims to build a mosque in this location because it is sacred, hollow ground. Sacred, hallowed ground. If it's sacred, hallowed ground, I would like you to tell that to the strip club next door and the liquor store on the other side of this former Burlington coat factory store. But to show you how the Islamophobes and the haters are successful in pushing their narratives, even supporters of the community center began to refer to it as the Ground Zero Mosque. And we had already lost that battle then. This Islamophobia that we see today has even seeped into pop culture and into Hollywood. Right? In the 1980s, during the Cold War, when you looked at Hollywood movies, it was always about the Red Soviet communist threat. But basically from 1994 onwards, with Arnold Schwarzenegger's True Lies onwards, that's the first time that we saw the Crimson Jihad. And ever since then, virtually every movie that has to deal with American foreign policy or spy thrillers revolves around smarmy Arab Muslim men who are seen as the proverbial boogeyman or the proverbial terrorist. These Islamophobes could not even handle a reality television show about average Muslims. In the year 2012, the cable network TLC decided to run a reality television show called All American Muslim. Do some of you remember that? Yeah. All American Muslim followed the lives of 5 average Arab American Muslim families in Dearborn, Michigan. These 5 families included a local high school football coach, the deputy sheriff of the Wayne County Sheriff's Department. One of the women on the show was a clerk for the federal judge. They wanted to show that we Muslims are as normal and as screwed up as everybody else. But that was not enough. Even that was too much for many of the people who hate Muslims in America today. So there was a fringe right-wing group in Florida known as the Florida Families Association. And basically what they tried to do, and what they were sadly relatively successful at doing, was they started a letter writing campaign to the advertisers of TLC's All American Muslim, asking them to remove their advertisements from this show because it did not show the true jihadist face of Muslims in America. And believe it or not, 2 major American corporations, Lowe's Home Improvement and Kayak.com, both removed their ads from All American Muslim in an act of corporate cowardice. Now, do you think that if this show was called All American Latinos or All American Jewish people or All American anybody else, that any corporation would have the audacity to remove their advertisement from this show? Of course not. But this is to show where we have been and where we are going today as a community. Which leads me to Donald Trump. How much time do I have? Now, it's important to keep in mind, and again, it would be intellectually dishonest of me if I didn't say that, again, that Islamophobia did not begin with Donald Trump, nor will it end with Donald Trump. Let's not forget that before Donald Trump received the Republican nomination for president, there were 16 other candidates that were in a bloodthirsty Royal Rumble with one another to try and get the nomination of the Republican Party. And many of them also used Islamophobia as a central political platform, campaign, promise in many different ways. So for example, Dr. Ben Carson. Dr. Ben Carson once said that he believes, if elected president, that Muslims should not be allowed to serve as federal judges in America, which clearly violates the religious test clause of the United States Constitution. So not only should Ben Carson not have been allowed to run for president, he should have retroactively failed 9th grade civics class for not knowing the Constitution. Ben Carson single-handedly destroyed the stereotype that all brain surgeons are smart. We had Senator Ted Cruz from your neighboring state of Texas.
We don't.
Yeah. Ted Cruz, Newt Gingrich, Rick Santorum, a lot of these former has-been political aspirants, and numerous times during their political careers have stated that Islamic Sharia law is coming to take over America. Again, these candidates clearly have not read the Supremacy Clause of the United States Constitution, which states that the Constitution, and only the United States Constitution, shall be the supreme law of the land. So these guys should also retroactively fail 9th grade civics course. But they know what they're doing. They know what they're doing. They know that even though these policies will get struck down in the court of law in America, they know that it currently wins in the court of public opinion in America. The Pew Research Center every year comes out with a poll on Americans' attitudes towards religious minority demographic groups in the United States of America. And every year, without fail, Muslims rank second to last, right above atheists, as the most hated religious groups in America today. Believe it or not, this year, in the year 2017, for the first time in American history, atheists actually overtook Muslims, and now Muslims are the most hated religious group in America today. And the one point that I always like to highlight is that a group of people, atheists, who do not even believe in God, are considered a more favorable religious group than us Muslims. That's how bad our situation is today. And that is why it is important for every single one of the 400 of you sitting here today to support your local Muslim and civic organizations. People like Hassan and myself, he'll go back to Florida, I'll go back to Washington, D.C., and we will continue to do our part to try and protect your rights at the state or the national and international level. But it is your responsibility to take care of the Oklahoma Muslim community. It is nobody else's job. You will find allies. You will find amazing intersectional allies from the African American, LGBT, Jewish, Latino, people with disability community. You'll find great allies, but when it comes time to actually supporting your own institutions, it is the 400 of you in this room that will ensure the survival, inshallah, of CAIR-Oklahoma long after Adam, Hassan, and I have left this earth. And that is the one major blind spot that we have in the American Muslim community today. And for the youngsters out there, for the parents, I want you to understand something here. Not only is our religion under attack, and has been under attack since September 11th, but for many of us who were born and raised in this country, your children who were born and raised here, even our American identity has been questioned because of our darker skin or ethnic sounding names. I will give you an example highlighting this from my professional life. I once gave a live nationally televised debate on a news network that will remain nameless, Fox News. And as soon as we cut to commercial break, I'm sitting across from the news anchor, and they're taking off my microphone and my makeup. And while we're in the commercial break, the news anchor, she looks at me, and she goes, "That was a great interview that you just did. Your accent didn't come through at all. Where are you from?" And I said, "Chicago." And she goes, No, where are you really from?" And I said, "Chicago." And she asked me a third time, No, where are you really from?" And I said, "Chicago." And I walked out of her studio. This woman could not fathom that a brown man would be able to walk into her television studio, be able to articulate himself in a live 7-minute nationally televised debate without having some sort of stereotypical bobble-headed accent. Her notion of what it meant to be an American did not include me, even though I was born in one of the 13 original colonies. And in many ways, that makes me more American than her. But the point of what I'm trying to get across from that anecdote is that even though we all consider ourselves Americans, there's a large swath of the American public that does not. And in order for us to assert our own rights here in Oklahoma, whether you live in Oklahoma City, in Tulsa, in Norman, Edmond, wherever it is, your job is to open your checkbooks and help to support your Muslim organizations. Would you believe that the Islamophobia industry, the Islamophobia machine in America, according to the Center for American Progress, the top 5 Islamophobes in the country received over $42 million in donations over a 7-year span. 5 people got $42 million. And CAIR as an organization, as chapters, we're lucky to clear 200, 300,000 a night. That's shameful. I know many of you in this room are doctors. My father's a doctor. My wife's a doctor. I know how much doctors make. When Hassan was doing his fundraising campaign, aside from the fact, next time keep reminding people that it's tax deductible, every other sentence. How many people in this room like Starbucks coffee? Please raise your hand. All right. And I'm sure more of you are not admitting it, but you like it anyway. The average Starbucks drink costs about $4. You spend, on average, and I spend on average, about $100 a month, $100, $120 a month on Starbucks coffee alone. You could make a $1,200 donation thinking that this is being paid for by my daily Starbucks. How many people have cable television in their home? Please raise your hand. Most of us with our cable bundles, we'll pay about $100 a month, if not a little bit more, for cable, internet, TV. Whatever you do, remember that we spend money frivolously all the time on things that are not necessities and are not central to our survival as human beings here in the United States of America. Hassan mentioned during his talk about the internment of Japanese Americans during World War II. What most people don't know about the internment of Japanese Americans is 2 things. Number one, for anybody who's taken a history course before, you know that World War II lasted from 1941 until 1945. Do you know when the last Japanese American walked out of an internment camp was? 1948. 3 years after World War II had already ended, we still had citizens of the United States that were in internment camps simply because of their ethnicity. The second thing that most people don't know about when it comes to the internment of Japanese Americans is that the Supreme Court case that legalized and allowed for President Roosevelt to intern these Japanese Americans. The Supreme Court case is known as Korematsu v. United States. That case has still not been overturned yet in the Supreme Court. So if you think that it couldn't happen today with the rhetoric that we've seen from Donald Trump, and remember, the Muslim ban was just the latest of what he's been talking about. He started his campaign talking about Islam hating us. He said that Muslims should be required to have special IDs on us, similar to what many Jewish people had to wear around during Nazi Germany. He's also said that we should conduct more surveillance and send more snitches into the American Muslim community. Now, I can assure you something, and in terms of my contribution to the American Muslim community, is if there are ever internment camps that are made for American Muslims, I have already publicly volunteered to be prisoner number 1. So there are people at the national and the international level who will literally give our lives for you, and we plan on giving our lives for you. We have forsaken every single luxury. We have forsaken every luxury to ensure that our children and our grandchildren have a safe place to live. As a civil rights lawyer, I always tell people that the great thing about our American constitutional legal system is that the protection of the right of one American is the protection of the rights of all Americans. And the example that I always give that resonates with audiences around the country is about the seminal Supreme Court case of Brown versus the Board of Education. Now, many of you know that Brown v. Board was a 1958 Supreme Court decision which ended segregation in our American schools. It was about a little African American girl in Kansas who could not go to the school by her house because it was segregated. So she decided to stand up for her rights. And the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, then headed by a volunteer lawyer named Thurgood Marshall, who ended up being an Associate Justice of the United States Supreme Court, decided to take Brown v. Board of Education on a pro bono basis. And because of that Supreme Court decision, they were able to end segregation in our American schools. But what most people don't know about the legacy of Brown versus the Board of Education is that Brown v. Board was also used as the legal precedent for Title VII of the 1964 Civil Rights Act, which bans employment discrimination of any kind for any one of us in this room here today. So just think about that for a second. A little 7-year-old black girl who had never worked a day in her life now protects the employment rights of every single one of us in this room. And that is why our American legal system is so amazing, is again, the right of one person in America is the right of all people in America. So I want you to, even if you're not a Muslim, I don't want you to think, well, I'm not a Muslim, so I don't have to worry about the Muslim ban. Or you know what? I'm not an undocumented immigrant, so I don't have to worry about comprehensive immigration reform. Or I'm not a part of the LGBT community, I don't have to worry about marriage equality. I have health care, I don't need to worry about universal health care. We all have to serve as allies to one another. We have to be intersectional political allies to people who are in the same boat that we are in terms of marginalization. Whether that is the Black Lives Matter movement, whether that is Latinos, whether that is women, people with disabilities, basically every group that Donald Trump has mocked, we need to embrace. And it's important for us to understand that the vast majority of Americans say that their negative views about Islam are based on the fact that they don't know any Muslims in their everyday lives. But you know what? Even though Muslims represent 1% of the American population, we represent 10% of doctors in America. We are overrepresented by 1,000%. For all the doctors who are clapping, you better be opening your checkbooks at the same time. We are literally overrepresented by 1,000% in the medical field, but our patients don't know that we're Muslim. And I promise you, once we humanize ourselves to our friends, neighbors, and coworkers who are not like us, that is the only way that we are going to demystify Islam and Muslims and be able to push back on racist idiots like John Bennett and his stupid questionnaire that he's passing out in his office. It is through that humanization that we are going to be able to be proud as American Muslims. For the kids in this room, I want you to know that you have nothing to be afraid of. I want you to know that you should be proud of being a Muslim. That there are many of us who will make sure and will give our entire life to ensure that you live safe, peaceful, and comfortable lives. Organizations like CAIR-Oklahoma, Adam Sultani, we have dedicated our lives to this work, and we cannot continue this work without your financial support. And if the Islamophobes can get $42 million to defame our religion and our people, the least that we can do is donate to our own local organizations to ensure that your family's rights are protected here in Oklahoma, and to ensure that we can go back and continue to protect the rights of Muslims and people of conscience everywhere. Again, I would like to thank CAIR-Oklahoma for inviting me here. Again, this is a wonderful organization. I really hope you will take your checkbooks out, write your tax-deductible donation to CAIR-Oklahoma today. You are not only going to get spiritual benefit, you will get real-world benefit as well. Again, thank you for coming out tonight. I know you could have been other places on a Saturday night. I want to thank you for your time. Assalamu alaikum and good night.